Rain, wet tinder, sparks fall, and die. Again. Again. His fingers are too numb now to strike harder. In the 1700s, this isn't inconvenient. It's the first domino. No fire, no dry clothes, no sleep, no strength to walk out tomorrow. A chain that ends with a body nobody finds until spring. This is the story of the tool that broke that chain, the ferro rod. Where it came from, who built it, and why it took governments, chemists, and a Swedish businessman losing a bet to get you the thing sitting in your bug-out bag right now. For most of human history, fire wasn't a feature, it was a filter. It decided who made it through the night and who didn't. Before steel even existed, people were striking rocks together, flint against iron pyrite, to throw a spark hot enough to catch tinder. The 5,300-year-old Alpine mummy known as Otzi carried a chunk of pyrite in his kit, alongside a fungus that catches a spark. That's not a campfire trick. That's a survival tool old enough to predate written language. As iron and steel spread, firemaking got an upgrade. A curved piece of carbon steel struck against a sharp flint edge, throwing a spark onto char cloth, a scrap of cotton pre-burned just enough to catch an ember without flaming. The coal goes into a nest of dry tinder. Blow. Fire. That system, flint, steel, char cloth, became the standard. Vikings kept it in tinderboxes. Romans carried it on campaign. Frontiersmen packed it west. Every household kept one by the hearth, because letting the fire go out meant starting this whole ritual over from nothing. Here's the problem nobody likes to talk about. Flint and steel is skill-dependent. It's slow, it struggles in wind, and it is brutal in the wet, because char cloth, the thing that actually catches the spark, is just partially burned cotton, and wet cotton doesn't hold an ember. None of this was a minor inconvenience, it was policy. It shaped where people traveled, how far from shelter they'd risk going, and how much dry material they carried at all times, because the cost of guessing wrong was measured in nights, not minutes. Flint and steel worked for thousands of years. Then chemistry gave the world something faster. In 1826, in a small pharmacy in Stockton-on-Tees, England, a chemist named John Walker was mixing a paste for gun charges. He scraped his stirring stick against the hearth to clean it off. It burst into flame. Walker had accidentally created the friction match, a stick that could produce fire on demand, with no flint, no steel, no tinderbox. He started selling them the following spring as friction lights. He never patented the idea. He didn't think it was important enough. Within a few years, other manufacturers copied and improved his formula, and by the 1850s, Sweden had introduced the safety match, the version, more or less, still in a box in your kitchen drawer today. For the first time in human history, fire was portable, fast, and didn't require training. That should be the end of the story. It isn't, because matches have a weakness flint and steel never had: chemistry. Wet matches don't strike. Cold, brittle matchheads snap. And a box of matches is, at the end of the day, a box of paper and phosphorus, which means it has an expiration date measured in exposure, not years. The wilderness didn't care that firemaking had gotten easier for everyone else. It just found a new way to make it fail. In 1903, an Austrian scientist named Karl Auer von Welsbach was elbow-deep in a completely different problem. He was working with thorium mining residue and rare earth metals, trying to improve the gas mantles that lit the streets of Europe. He mixed roughly 70% cerium with 30% iron and noticed something strange. When he scratched the surface of this new alloy, it threw off a spark. Not a weak one, a hot one. He named it after its two main ingredients: ferrum, Latin for iron, and cerium, the rare earth metal doing most of the work. Ferrocerium. Welsbach wasn't trying to reinvent fire starting. He stumbled into it the way Walker stumbled into the match, chasing something else entirely and running straight into an alloy that ignites itself. Ferrocerium spark comes from its brittleness and a shockingly low auto-ignition temperature, which means even a light scrape throws off burning particles instead of just scratched metal. By 1907, he'd built a factory to manufacture it, and within a decade, ferrocerium flints were sitting inside pocket lighters across Europe. The same basic mechanism, more or less unchanged, that still lights a Zippo or a butane torch today. Nobody in that factory in 1907 was thinking about hikers or preppers or bug-out bags. They were building lighter parts. But they'd just packed a self-igniting spark into something small enough for a pocket, and it would take 2 world wars and a Swedish bet to figure out what that was really worth. Fast forward through the early 20th century, and ferrocerium starts showing up somewhere new: military survival kits. Governments had a problem matches couldn't solve: a downed pilot, a stranded soldier, a scout separated from his unit. These people needed fire that worked wet, cold, at altitude, and after being crushed at the bottom of a pack for months. A cardboard box of matches fails at least one of those conditions almost every time. Matches feared water. Ferrocerium doesn't. It doesn't absorb it, doesn't degrade the way phosphorus does, and scraped wet or dry, it throws sparks reported in the 2,000 to 3,000 degrees Celsius range, hot enough to ignite tinder that flint and steel simply can't touch. By the 1970s, an inventor named Saul Levinson had combined a ferrocerium rod with a block of magnesium, shave a pile of magnesium curls with a knife, strike the rod into the pile, and even damp kindling stands a fighting chance. It became known as the Doan magnesium fire starter, and versions of that design were adopted by NATO militaries, especially in aircrew survival kits, because for a pilot going down over open water or frozen terrain, this small rod wasn't gear. It was the difference between being found and not. That's the part people forget when they see a ferro rod clipped to a keychain today. This thing was designed under one assumption: someone's life was actually on the line. Not hypothetically, specifically. If you want to understand the tools that keep people alive, not just buy whatever's trending, subscribe now. Next, how a piece of military hardware ended up on your keychain. Here's where the story takes a turn nobody would have predicted: a lost bet in Sweden in 1995. A man named Michael Odqvist Jagush had brought resin-soaked Maya sticks back from Guatemala, convinced they'd catch on in Europe as fire-starting kindling. They didn't, at least not on their own. Then he paired them with a ferrocerium rod that had originally been developed for the Swedish Department of Defense, built specifically to light a fire in any weather, at any altitude, without fail. The combination worked, startlingly well. Together, they became the foundation of a company called Light My Fire, and the product, marketed as the Swedish fire steel, is essentially the direct ancestor of every ferro rod clipped to a backpack today. Notice what just happened. A military-grade ignition tool, engineered for soldiers who couldn't afford a wet match, got handed to civilians almost by accident, bundled with fire-starting sticks a businessman brought back from a losing bet on the other side of the planet. That's the arc in one line. Pyrite for Ötzi, steel for the Vikings, phosphorus for the Victorians, ferrocerium for fighter pilots, and finally, a hardened rod on a keychain for anyone who doesn't want to bet their night on a lighter that might be empty. So what makes this specific piece of metal different from everything that came before it? Flint and steel needs skill, dry char cloth, and calm conditions. Matches need dry chemistry and an intact box. Lighters need fuel, and fuel runs out, and butane struggles in the cold. A ferro rod needs almost none of that. Scrape it, wet, cold, high altitude, doesn't matter, and it throws a shower of burning metal particles hot enough to ignite fine tinder on contact. It doesn't have a wick to run dry. It doesn't have a chemical head to get soaked. Worn down over thousands of strikes, it just keeps sparking, because the entire rod is the fuel. That's not marketing. That's the same physical property Karl Auer von Welsbach noticed by accident in 1903. Brittleness, plus a spark-friendly ignition point, still doing exactly the same job, unchanged, over 100 years later. Picture that same man again. Rain, wet bark, numb hands. Except this time, he's not striking steel against stone, hoping for a coal that a soaked cloth can't hold. He drags a small rod across a striker. The sparks don't land on hope. They land on a curl of shaved tinder, and it catches on the first pass. Wet. Cold. First try. A thread of smoke, then flame. The chain of no fire, no dry clothes, no sleep, no strength, never even starts. That's what thousands of years of trial, one happy accident in a pharmacy, one accident in a lab, and one lost bet in Sweden bought you. A tool small enough for a keychain, tested hard enough for a downed pilot, and reliable enough that the story that used to end in the woods doesn't have to end there anymore.